Okay, let's see what we've got to work with in terms of the server error. So once again, I'm just going to inspect, go to our console and click on the server error. And if we take a look inside the response we get, inside the data, we've got effectively an object here with details, message, and status code as its properties. So what we'll do is we'll create an interface based on these properties. And what we'll also do is create a component that we can redirect the user to in the event that we get a server error. And we also want to display the details of that error inside that component as well. So what we'll do, we'll head back to VS Code and we'll go back to Explorer, and inside the app, inside the models, let's create a new file and we'll call this one server error.ts. And inside here, what we'll do is we'll just export interface and we'll call it server error. And we'll have a status code property, which is going to be a type of number. We'll have the message, which is going to be a string, and we'll also have the details, of course, which is going to be a string as well. Now, what we need to do in this case is when we redirect the user to a server error component, it's going to be different to our validation errors because we're not going to be able to pass this down to a child. We're going to have to redirect the user to a different component and then somehow get the error that we get back from our agent file and display that in the component. That's our goal. So what we're going to do is store the error we get back from the API in a store, in a MobX store. And what we'll do to achieve that is we'll create a new store. Inside our stores folder, we'll create a new file. And we'll use this for a few different things. So we're going to call it commonstore.ts. And let's start cleaning things up at the top. So what we're going to do here is we're going to export a default class and call it common store. And we're going to have a class property of error. And this is going to be our server error, or it's going to be null. And we're going to give it an initial value of null. And we need a constructor here, as it's a store, and we're going to make use of the make auto observable and then pass this. So our error is now an observable. And we'll create a single function here, and we'll say set server error. And we'll take in the error as a parameter, and this is going to be a type of server error. And in fact, we need this to be an arrow function so that we don't run into any binding issues inside our class. And then we'll say list.error equals error. Now, because we've created a new store, we'll need to go to our stores.ts file, and we need to add this as a new store. So what we'll do in our interface store, we'll say common store is a type of common store. And then in our store object, we'll add a comma and say common store is a new common store. As simple as that to get this set up. And then what we'll do is we'll create a new component so that we can make use of this. And we'll head back over to Solution Explorer. And inside our errors folder, we'll create another new file. And this one we'll call server error.tsx. And we'll say import React from React. And we'll say export default function and call it server error. And we need to go and get our new common store. So we'll say const common store equals, and we'll use our useStore hook that we created to get this. And then we'll return, and we'll put this inside a semantic UI container. We'll add a header, and we'll say as equals h1, and we'll say content equals server error, and we'll add another header below this, and we'll make it a subheader, and then say as equals h5, and we'll give it a color equal to red, and we'll say the content is equal to the common store dot error, and we'll use optional chaining and specify the message. And then we'll say common store in curly brackets, dot error, and details, and double ampersand, and then we'll specify segments. And inside here, we'll just add another header. And we'll say as equals h4, and we'll say content equals stack trace. And we'll say color equals teal. And below this, we'll add a code element. And we'll say style equals margin top. And we'll specify 10 pixels. And inside here, we'll specify the common store.error.details. And because we're getting information from the store here, then we're going to need to make this component an observer. So what we'll do is say export default observer, and we'll wrap our function in parentheses. And with all of this in place, we can head back to our agent.ts file now. And what we can do, in the case that we get a 500 error, what we'll do is we'll say store, and we'll need to bring in store from the auto import, and then we can say common store, and then we can use our set server error, and we can pass in the data to our common store, to that particular function, so it's stored in that error observable. And then we can say history.push, and we can say /server-error. And then the only thing we need to do to finish this off is just create a route so that we can go to this particular component. So we'll go back to our app.tsx file. And just below our test errors, let's just add another route. So I'll copy this line down. And we'll say server-error. And the component in this case will be server error. And with all this in place, we can now go and test our new functionality. So let's take a look, and I'll just refresh the page again. And we're on our errors component, and this time if we click server error, we get taken to our server error component. We get the message saying server error, this is a server error, and then we get our stack trace, which tells us exactly where the problem occurred, including the class and including the line number and what the problem is. So this makes it easy for us to see when we've got a 500 internal server error on our server. It's just an easier way of going to look at the particular stack trace, and we can get it from here, and we can also get it, of course, from our terminal. If we take a look at where we're running .NET Run, then we also see exactly the same information that's logging out into our console because we added the logging in our server middleware. Now, of course, this is too much information for a production environment, but we will not see this level of detail in a production environment. If we get a server error, all we're going to see is server error and internal server error for the message. We're not going to see this stack trace if we're in production mode. So we're almost there. And there's just one more thing to take care of, and that's what happens if somebody somehow tries to get an activity from our API with a bad GUID. And we'll take a look at that next.